Are you smarter than a politician?
Anybody?
The answer is yes, if you are among the millions of students who, thanks to the charity run by this high school teacher, get to watch my videos in class.
Should only take you a couple of minutes.
Great or good?
Actually, not all the videos are mine, but the charity's called Stossel in the Classroom because I offer free videos to any teacher who wants video teaching aids for courses in economics, government, critical thinking, and current events. Watching and discussing the videos gives kids new perspective on things.
But the people that accept welfare, over time, they lose the incentive to work.
Every year we hold an essay contest. Winners get money plus a free trip for them and their teacher to visit us here in New York City. This year's contest invited students to write about price gouging, a practice hated by the media and most politicians.
Jeff Sessions and the President of the United States will not tolerate gouging.
Gouging becomes an issue every hurricane season because after storms, some merchants raise prices.
They've taken advantage of us.
That leads politicians to pass laws that say,
during a state of emergency, you cannot substantially raise prices, whether it's a hotel room, fuel, commodities such as water, generators. You cannot raise prices substantially, and that's what these bad people are doing.
Fortunately, our students get to hear a Nobel Prize-winning economist give the other side of the argument.
The gougers deserve a medal.
The gougers are heroes, said Milton Friedman, because they take risks to bring in goods that people desperately need. After Hurricane Katrina, one so-called gouger was John Shepperson. Watching news reports about Katrina, he learned that people desperately needed things.
My wife just got out of the hospital, and she's very sick, and we need a generator.
So John bought 19 generators, put them in a rented U-Haul, and drove it 600 miles to part of Mississippi which had no electricity.
5 million people in this region are without power.
John offered to sell his generators for twice what he paid for them. People were eager to buy.
People were excited. We had a product they needed.
But Mississippi police wouldn't let John sell them. They called that price gouging. Instead, they confiscated his generators and locked John up in this jail. So did the public benefit? No.
What do we need? Come on, guys. Generators. Food.
Somebody needs to bring these products to people when there are disasters and emergencies. And this is going to be one person that's not going to be there that they've took out of the equation.
Students who entered our video essay contest expanded on that point.
In modern day, you see countries like Venezuela suffer from the fact that their governments continue to place price controls on all items.
17-year-old Annalise Scafad of Raleigh, North Carolina, submitted this video and won our high school award.
34 of the 50 U.S. states have laws against price gouging.
As I did more and more research, I was like, okay, maybe price gouging isn't such a bad thing.
Erica Lewis of Towson University won the college-level category.
Sellers are able to earn more profit, and buyers are capable of getting the supplies they desperately need.
Actually, the price gougers are the moral ones.
17-year-old Maggie Hransich of Grove City, Pennsylvania, won her high school essay contest.
If you just look at the economics, the most people are helped if you keep the government out of it.
When people hear price gouging, they think, oh, gouging, this awful thing that you'd think of, but it really is kind of just another name for supply and demand.
Wisdom from students helped to look at all sides of the issue by teachers who use our videos. Next year's essay contest will be announced soon. Check out sitc.org for the latest information. This is fast. Might this be the next revolution in urban travel?
Welcome to Capital Bike Share.
Even better than the excellent bike sharing programs that cities allowed recently. These bike share bikes are great, but you gotta pick them up in the dock here and return them to the dock, and just putting these docks in costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. As so often happens, entrepreneurs invented something even better than bikes that must be locked into a dock. Dockless bicycles. Check out the bike, take it anywhere, and just leave the thing. But just as I got used to dockless bicycles, companies like Bird and Lime invented still another option. electric scooters that people can share.
They've scooted onto streets across the country.
It's like a watered-down version of a motorcycle.
A new two-wheeled, battery-powered way to get around.
Yeah, that's what I like about that.
To unlock a scooter, you just use an app on your phone. For $2, I can jump on one of these things, go where I need to go, and then just leave it anywhere. It stays here until someone else rents it. Won't it be stolen? No, because if someone tries to steal, the brakes lock up. And this happened.
Please unlock me to ride me, or I'll call the police.
If the thief took one anyway, a GPS device inside the scooter would lead police right to the thief. The Leave the Scooter Anywhere system works.
It's a new twist on old technology that entrepreneurs found to give us something that works even better to solve needs in dense urban areas.
That's a wonderful thing, if they don't stop it. By they, I mean politicians. Many cities banned the scooters.
A Bay Area city at war.
San Francisco said they endanger public health and safety.
Broken bones, bruises, and near misses by these scooters.
At 17 miles an hour, it hurts.
Who am I going to sue when I get knocked down?
It's been banned in San Francisco.
Which is particularly ironic because San Francisco always seems to be clamoring for more transportation options. They're complaining about the traffic, and they're asking particularly for green transportation options.
In San Francisco and many other cities, scooter companies tried to escape destructive regulation by doing what Uber and Airbnb did. Just put these out there and hope that by the time the politicians notice, the scooters would be too popular to ban. They didn't get permission first.
And that's the issue. Unfortunately, cities haven't learned from their past experiences with companies like Uber and Airbnb, and they want these innovators to come ask for permission and go through the regulatory processes.
Which can take years.
Which can take years and can also prevent consumers from accessing a transportation option that could be accessible now.
San Francisco's now granted permits to 2 small companies, but not Lime and Bird, the companies that started the business.
But pedestrians say they're a hazard.
They get up next to me and zoom right on by.
Still, there are safety issues. This man reportedly died after falling off a scooter. And some people ride recklessly.
Excuse me. Oh, fuck. Oh, shit. Are you okay?
They're going to run us old people over.
We actually haven't seen a large number of accidents or injuries with these scooters.
Some people have been hurt.
And some people get hurt, but we don't see ourselves banning bicycles because somebody might get hurt on a bicycle. There will be social norms that evolve, just like we've seen with bike lanes.
Then there's the crazy opposition.
Protesters say they think the deluge of electric scooters in San Francisco is a symptom of gentrification.
This group's upset because scooters are used by rich people, tech workers.
The scooters have provoked intense anger here.
Some people throw scooters into the ocean. Others set scooters on fire. People vandalize these.
It's a low percentage of vandalism, though. Well, I was just in another city the other day, and we had 10,000 rides, and we had 18 vandalism complaints. So when you think about the amount
So the
of
irresponsible media blows this up. Whenever there's something new, the media always hype the problems.
Some people call these scooters a nuisance.
Which makes it odd that this city, Washington, welcomed scooters.
What I love about the district is they are letting us innovate in this space. And
how can that be? This is Washington, D.C. They regulate everything.
Well, they're regulating us too, but in a very responsible way.
Good for D.C. Not often I get to say that. One last twist.
So let's scan.
The scooters even create new ways to make money.
Loading.
Accept.
We
did it!
Yes.
When scooters lose battery power, scooter companies pay people, like this family, to find them, pick them up, and charge them at home. $5 to $20 for every scooter they charge. What do you do with the money?
Well, I'm going to try and invest.
So kids make money, people have a new form of transport that's green, it's good exercise, takes up less space than cars. Maybe, just maybe, the politicians will leave them alone.
That's a bad one right there, boy.
Some people are very upset over Donald Trump's pick for the Supreme Court.
He is a dangerous man.
Are you ready for a fight?
What are they so upset about?
What's at stake is freedom for LGBTQ Americans, for equal rights, for civil rights.
People are freaking out.
They are freaking out because they don't understand those top areas, whether it's abortion or gay rights or Citizens United, that people on the left tend to be concerned about. There's really not going to be a change.
That's because the court, especially Chief Justice Roberts, respects precedent, especially when people have come to depend on previous decisions. After 250,000 gay marriages and 45 years of legal abortions, the court's unlikely to reverse itself on those issues.
I will nominate Judge Brett Kavanaugh.
But if Kavanaugh replaces Kennedy, there will be changes. Individual freedom. What does Kavanaugh mean for that?
He's great there, probably better than Kennedy.
Retiring Justice Kennedy sometimes ruled against individual liberty, like when he said it was okay for a Connecticut town to grab Suzette Kilo's property in Little Pink House because the developer, who might pay more in taxes, wanted her land.
Kennedy voted for the bad guys. He voted to take away the property from the people. Kavanaugh could very well be the fifth vote to overturn Kelo. One major area that people might be upset about is affirmative action.
We won't stand for Donald Trump's attempt to use the Supreme Court as a weapon against all of our progress.
Kavanaugh could provide the fifth vote to overturn that 40-year-old experiment with using racial preferences to promote some kind of nebulous diversity.
Lawsuit against Harvard University for discriminating against Asian American applicants.
That case against Harvard's racial preferences may reach the Supreme Court soon, and the court may end affirmative action. The court, with Kavanaugh on board, may also toss out some gun restrictions.
He has written one of the leading lower court opinions expanding the scope of the individual right for armed self-defense. He's not a gun nut, he's a constitutionalist.
Kavanaugh has a history of reining in government regulators.
All these alphabet agencies that increasingly intrude in people's lives. He has written at length that the government keeps doing things that it doesn't have the power to do.
The Constitution's separation of powers protects individual liberty.
At his nomination announcement at the White House, he talked about how the separation of powers is there to protect liberty. That's fantastic. I think libertarians will like the pushback on government excess.
But Kavanaugh does side with government on one form of excess.
The government was collecting all of our metadata, all of our phone records. Kavanaugh ruled that he was just fine with it.
He said that the NSA is justified in collecting metadata on Americans as part of the...
And he volunteered to write that. He was enthusiastic that this serves a critically important special need, preventing terrorist attacks. But the government says we're aware of no instance where the program discovered an attack.
That's his worst case. Now, it's unclear how that extends beyond the national security surveillance area. He has a lot of good opinions on police needing a warrant or laws being drawn so broadly that prosecutors are convicting people who are not guilty. Clearly, he defers to the government on national security grounds, but most judges and justices do anyway.
At least on other forms of regulation, Kavanaugh has a strong record of not deferring to government.
We have a moral obligation to act on climate.
As a judge in D.C., Kavanaugh voted to strike down some environmental rules, some EPA regulations where the staff just said, we're going to do this.
That's right. I mean, I like the idea of clean air and clean water. There are federal laws that protect that. But in the last decade, the EPA has taken a lot of liberties.
But it's their job. Clean the air, clean the water.
EPA does not get a free-floating power under the Constitution or otherwise to do what they think is best. It's Congress's job to say, our air isn't clean enough. Here's how you should be doing your job, EPA.
Why is it better for Congress to do it?
Congress is elected, and if we don't like what it's doing, we can fire it. That's the way the checks and balances work. And that's why it's so important that courts hold the bureaucrats' feet to the fire. Libertarians should definitely be happy with Kavanaugh. He's not going to agree with us all the time, certainly, but no justices or judges do. The fact that we're looking around the edges to see what sorts of things we can disagree on shows how far we've moved in 10 or 20 or 30 years.
Right. At least now people and judges talk about limiting government. Now regulation's out of control. That's new compared to the last 10, 20, or 30 years.
Hi, I'm Lana with Red Ice. It's true, you just can't argue with a leftist. All the evidence on the planet won't be enough because they live in an alt universe. Liberals are very bad at debating because they never do it, because they only talk to other self-affirming, emotional stroking liberals and have had zero opposition to challenge them. They are caught with their pants down at the most basic questions. But people like myself are very comfortable arguing with opponents. We've had a lot of practice to sharpen our arguments, and we don't crumble when people call us bad words. We deal with outrageous, never-seen-before censorship, banning, discrimination, defamation, and we're still here. As we toughen up, they become even weaker. Here are questions liberals cannot answer. 1. Gotta start with this one. If you're so pro-mass non-European immigration, why do you live in a white neighborhood? They may say, well, this town has plenty of diversity. Yeah, down there, not where you live, up here. Why aren't you living in an immigrant refugee part of town? 2. What percentage of America can be white? 60%? 40? 15? 2%? At what point is it acceptable? 3. At what point is it okay to have a border and immigration laws? 4. What percentage of the population do whites have to be before it's morally acceptable for them to be proud of their ancestors, their heritage? At what point can they advocate for their people with unions, orgs, and lobbyists, just like every other group? 5. When is it okay for a white guy to say, I am a proud, straight, white male? When is it okay for them to be loud and proud? 6. What is so wrong when European women want to have white children who look like them? Instead of, ooh, your mixed-race baby is so cute, how about, ooh, your little blonde, blue-eyed baby is so adorable and unique? 7. For legal immigration alone, 1 million plus a year come to America. That's like importing a large city every year. How many non-European people need to be in the country before it's okay to say, that's enough? 8. You liberals claim to be environmentalists, and yet you are not aware of the horrible environmental consequences of mass migration, not to mention the problem of limited resources and an overburdened physical infrastructure. Yeah, it used to be common knowledge among you, but we have so much and we waste so much, so the solution is to import the entire third world so they too can have and waste much and enjoy a first world lifestyle? There used to be a time not long ago when lefties complained about overpopulation, when white people were having babies, that is, but now they love huge populations of non-Europeans making 8 kids each. So libs, you A-okay with Mohammed up in Minnesota and his 8 wives and 25 kids living off of welfare paid for by mostly white people? Give them all your money then, stay out of mine. 9. Speaking of refugees, did you know there are people getting rich off the importing fake refugee business? 10. According to international law, refugees are supposed to go to the country nearest to them. So why isn't Israel and rich Gulf countries taking in any refugees? Why must they be flown at our expense way to Sweden, Australia, and North America? 11. About those refugees, do you even know how many are actually fleeing from catastrophic conditions and not just their own poverty? Like this much. I mean, come on, all those Mexicans seeking asylum. My white sister lives in Mexico. Plenty of space and options there. White liberals will say, well, it's okay if people are fleeing poverty. We have to give them a chance at a better life to become surgeons, inventors, and rocket scientists in European nations. Says who? Are you saying they can't do it without white people? That they need us to succeed? Well, what's wrong with their people? That's supremacist. 12. You want to help people? Why don't you go help them in their country? But you all never care to help European nations when they're in need. Why is that? Or are you saying they're never in need? And why is that? 13. To all those filthy rich celebrities making anti-white trash films, why aren't you taking in any refugees into your house surrounded by a wall in an upscale, gated community? 14. Who made you the morality police, judging on your self-righteous high horse, pretending to be God, saying what is morally right and wrong? I will answer that one for you. No one. You have zero moral authority. Remember, boys and girls, there is nothing wrong with Europeans loving and preferring European people and stopping the wave of mass immigration and fake refugees into their country. No other people would put up with this. And if your parents never told you, it is okay, more than okay. It is wonderful to be white every moment of every day. Don't hear it otherwise.
Ladies and gentlemen, in a time when virtually all social media is controlled by what seems like a single hidden hand, with certain people and alternative media outlets getting banned from multiple platforms at the same time, we need a way to bypass them and their control. Telegram. Join our Telegram group. Go to t.me/RedIceTV and download the free speech app, the pro free speech app, that have refused to hand over their encryption keys to governments that have requested them. This is an app that allows us to communicate directly with you. It's available both for your phone and desktop computer. So join the Red Ice TV Telegram group right now for announcements and updates, news and alerts when we have new content up. The app even allows us to upload content straight to it, should our YouTube channel and other social media accounts be taken down. So join our Telegram group and allow us to have an unfiltered, uncensored line of communication with you. Join our Telegram group. Go to t.me/RedIceTV and download the free speech app. Telegram.
First, we are honored to have NYU Econ Prof. William Easterly. Professor Easterly, please come to the stage. And, want to stay on the floor? Without further ado, I want the question for the conversation of the evening stated again, which is simply, is the best way to end global poverty free markets or government action? Professor Easterly will go first with a 10-minute introduction. Professor Easterly, please take the podium.
So my job tonight, I was assigned to represent the case that I indeed believe that free markets are the best way to end global poverty, not government action. But first, let's avoid the straw man that anyone who advocates free markets believes in some kind of zero role for government. Of course, I recognize there's a role for government, such as providing public services like police and courts. However, the problem in development has usually been too much emphasis on government intervention and too little on markets. So in that sense, I am arguing markets are a much underappreciated way in development of the best way to reduce poverty. I'm going to stress 3 channels by which markets work well to reduce poverty: better incentives, better use of knowledge, and then most novel is better rights. So let me start with incentives. The most obvious benefit of markets are the incentives to produce goods that create income and that meet consumer needs. State intervention in markets destroys these incentives and creates poverty. Let me start with something that I didn't actually put in my notes that is kind of a favorite of mine. Like many of the things I'm going to talk about, these are examples that I can back up with more systematic evidence that we can discuss in the more boring parts of Q&A. I'm going to give you mainly examples. My first favorite example is a picture from Cuba, of Fidel Castro's funeral. I don't know if any of you saw this picture. Fidel Castro is being carried in state, pulled by an army jeep, on a magnificently bedecked, flower-bedecked trailer with Fidel Castro's coffin. And there were soldiers, of course, marching in the parade, but the soldiers were not marching in the parade. They were pushing the jeep. I'm hoping for a better laugh line than that. Apparently, the incentives, even for Fidel Castro's funeral, were not quite strong enough to make the jeep work. So look that up on the internet. More seriously, I started my development career as a very junior World Bank economist in 1985 visiting Ghana. And Ghana in 1985 was a pretty grim place, and partly because the Ghanaian government had destroyed the economy by severe interventions and price controls. One example of price controls is the price of cocoa paid to cocoa farmers when they sold cocoa was so severely controlled they were only getting 6% of the world price of cocoa was going to the farmers. That is the world price for the raw material of cocoa. They were getting only 6% of that price. Not surprisingly, the cocoa economy of Ghana, that used to be the world's leading producer of cocoa, had collapsed, and a lot of other parts of the Ghanaian economy had collapsed. And so Ghana in 1985 was an extremely poor and dysfunctional place. And it's been one of the pleasures of mine throughout my career to watch Ghana revive as those controls have been lifted and prices and markets have been liberalized in Ghana. And Ghana is today a much happier story with Wi-Fi and the hotel rooms and a middle class and an upper class and a lower working class that is much less poor than it used to be. And that's been arguably a result of the great liberalization of markets that have happened since 1985. Of course, that hasn't happened everywhere, but it has happened in a lot of places and has been documented to be statistically associated with the revival of growth in Africa and Latin America in particular since the lost decades of the 80s and 90s in those regions. One exception to that positive trend is today Venezuela. As many of you know, Venezuela still has severe state controls over the economy and is suffering not only poverty, but even starvation for those living in Venezuela. There was a statistic that 74% of the population in 2016 lost on average 19 pounds in 2016 due to the shortages of food created by the state interventions and food price controls in Venezuela. At a personal level, I have a close friend whose mother-in-law lives in Venezuela, and they're desperate on how to rescue her from starving, because not only is she not able to get food in Venezuela, the packages that they send to her are confiscated by the government or stolen. So that's the kind of tragedy that happens with heavy state intervention that doesn't let markets work to relieve poverty. Let me next go to the knowledge channel. A great advantage of markets is they place the decisions in the hands of consumers and entrepreneurs who know best what works for them. Oh, I'm going to need a little more time than that. I'll give Joe extra time too, okay? We don't believe in budget constraints. We're economists.
Reallocation to Joe.
So I completely forgot what I was saying. Okay, knowledge channel. Markets place decisions in the hand of consumers and entrepreneurs who know best what works for them. Let me give you an example of what happens when you don't do that. There was a UN-appointed commission called the UN Broadband Commission that was chaired by Rwanda's dictator Paul Kagame. And Kagame himself set the tone for the commission. He said, broadband is so wonderful. He said, the transformational impact of broadband on people's lives and global economies is no longer questionable. He was ordering us not to question the benefits that the UN top-down commission had decided would be achieved by imposition of broadband everywhere. There was one skeptic that I read with some amusement that the UC Berkeley researcher Kentaro Toyama read some surveys that when a village gets hooked up to the internet on a broadband connection, and this is a quote from Toyama, he said, the dominant use is by young men who are playing games, quote, playing games, watching movies, or consuming adult content. So maybe broadband is not quite as great as Paul Kagame ordered us not to question it was. What actually works at the bottom is often a surprise that is best figured out by those at the bottom, by consumers and entrepreneurs. It turns out that consumers around the world wanted cell phones a lot more than they wanted broadband. Cell phone subscribers have rocketed in sub-Saharan Africa, for example. They now total 444 million subscribers of cell phones, reaching even very poor people in Africa who are able to buy a cell phone in very small incremental minutes at kiosk in every rural area and road by side. And this has had remarkable economic benefits. The firm M-Pesa in Kenya thought it was going to be a microcredit organization, but it found by accident that the service that was most in demand was mobile phone transfers of money from one mobile phone to another, which greatly enhanced and simplified the lives of farmers and traders and gave them a lot of unforeseen benefits that were only discovered through markets by those at the bottom. And M-Pesa now in Kenya produces more transfers than Western Union does worldwide. 6 billion transactions per year in Kenya done by M-Pesa. So that's the kind of surprise that the knowledge of consumers and entrepreneurs at the bottom through markets are able to figure out for themselves. Now let me do in the 2 minutes remaining to me, let me do...
What, 12 minutes?
No, not that much.
Okay.
Let me take a swig of water. Okay, the water doesn't count, right? So the third and most novel channel that I want to discuss is how markets promote rights. And so what do I mean by that? State-dominated societies will often see an elite capture the state and be able to oppress the rest of the population through state-sanctioned coercion. Market systems are inherently based on some degree of legal equality of property and contract rights among all the participants in market, including the poorest and the richest. And the reason that is because market transactions will not happen at all unless a minimum level of contract and property rights are recognized on both sides. Otherwise, one party would simply cheat or steal or oppress the other, and there would be no markets. There would simply be cheating, stealing, and oppression. So for markets to exist at all, these kind of rights have to be accepted by all the participants in markets. Now, this is not an original point. There was someone a while ago who saw this point named Adam Smith. Adam Smith commented in 1776 in The Wealth of Nations on the discovery of America, and he said, the discovery of the Americas could have been such a great opportunity for mutual benefits for Europeans and indigenous Americans. Europe had commodities to offer the Americas had new commodities to offer Europe. It could have been a great opportunity for the kind of free trade beloved by Adam Smith. But it was not to be, and this is a quote from Adam Smith. The savage injustice of the Europeans rendered an event which ought to have been beneficial to all, ruinous and destructive to those unfortunate countries. So that's the kind of realization that Smith had, that the benefits of markets are only available when there's a minimum level of legal equality on both sides, which was obviously drastically violated in the Americas, in the conquest of the Americas. And of course, this history is still very relevant today. I just got back from a trip to Peru, in which is very evident from casual observation to an economist or a non-economist that the indigenous Americans are still very much at the bottom, still suffering from the legacy of that oppression 5 centuries ago that has continued to some extent into the present with the capture of the Latin American states by the elite class. But on a more happy note, Smith offered a remarkable prophecy in The Wealth of Nations about how all this oppression would end. And he makes it clear that it would involve respecting the rights of non-Europeans. He said, and this is a quote from Adam Smith, "The inhabitants of all different quarters of the world may arrive at some respect for the rights of one another." That's a beautiful phrase that I think captures the essence of markets, respect for the rights of one another. And he said nothing seems more likely to establish this equality than an extensive commerce from all countries to all countries. And it's this somewhat happy news that in our own generation, this prophecy by Adam Smith has partially, to some degree, come true. That indeed, Adam Smith was right, that markets are the main way historically, and in our generation of globalized markets and migrants and capital flows, Markets are the main way historically and in our generation that different races, peoples, and nations have peacefully coexisted and cooperated for their mutual benefit. And that is, to me, the final and most beautiful benefit of markets. Thank you very much. Let's talk about Ethiopia. Let's think in terms of these channels of incentives, knowledge, and rights. So the problem with sort of government experts and aid experts also, which are in the same category, is that, first of all, they don't really have very strong incentives to get things right because they don't really get rewarded for getting things right or get punished for getting things wrong. As I can tell you from personal experience as a World Bank economist, I often got things wrong and got promoted for it. So, so the incentives are not very good. The knowledge is not very good, and the respective rights is not very good. So let's use Ethiopia as an example. I agree, Joe, you have a very good point about the infrastructure being a good thing for reducing poverty in Ethiopia and reducing famine. But the big picture is the famines in Ethiopia were happening during an extremely authoritarian regime called the Derg of a ruler who took the Soviet economy as a model, how to run an economy, and that's when the famines happened during that Soviet period of Ethiopian policy. And the big revival of economic growth that Joe was talking about happened precisely when a new ruler came in and overthrew the Derg and brought in a much more market approach towards.
Do you want this to be a conversation, or do you want it to?
Well, I'm sorry.
I'll give you a chance. I'll give you a chance to respond.
I just want to pick up a word. Okay. Revival is not exactly the right word because prior to the Derg was Haile Selassie and a two millennia of stagnation. So.
Well, I was. Well, Joe, I don't have all the data from 2 millennia, so I was concentrating on. I was concentrating on the period.
One minute.
The famines that you referred to, the famous famines in '85 in Ethiopia.
But they were before that too.
Yes, there were famines under Haile Selassie too. Yes. So, so there's more going on than just the only thing being the. I concede that point. Thank you, Joe. But so. The only problem with the new regime in Ethiopia is it still was infatuated with so many state solutions that did not work out that well. So let me give you another example of knowledge kind of misfiring. They thought a great idea would be a program called villagization that was started in 2012, and that involved the forced resettlement. So also failure to respect rights, and unfortunately the aid experts also endorsed this approach and showed a shocking disregard for the property rights of Ethiopian farmers who were being forcibly resettled in the government model villages that the government thought would be better for them, except the model villages didn't have water for their cattle, didn't have fields that were fertile. They were much worse than the villages that they were forcibly resettled from that they had freely chosen. And a lot of the victims of this policy in the province of Gambela wound up fleeing into refugee camps into Kenya, and one of them made his way to Britain and sued the British aid agency for supporting all this stupid stuff. So, that's a good example of how incentives are wrong, knowledge is faulty, and there's a shocking respect for the rights of poor people involved in a lot of these state and aid expert kind of coercive solutions. Well, I agree with you, Joe. The mechanism for correcting mistakes in Ethiopia was a massive popular protest that got rid of the old government doing all these stupid things and brought in the new government you're talking about that is promising liberalization and enhanced freedom for Ethiopian citizens. I want to comment also quickly on this point that rights, that my freedom could be someone else's unfreedom. I don't think that's I think the correct understanding of freedom is that we can all reach a mutually consistent understanding of our own zone of personal freedoms that we're all willing to respect for each other. And so that a proper understanding of freedom that we see most exemplified in market transactions is that freedom is not a zero-sum game. It's not a zero-sum game where more freedom for me means less freedom for you. More freedom for all of us means that we can all engage in mutually beneficial transactions through social interactions, through markets, all based on the understanding that we all have our own zone of personal respect for our rights and personal liberty and property rights and contract rights and human rights, all those zones of freedom. Those are a big positive sum game. These are not something that we achieve at the expense of each other. These are something that we all achieve together for mutually beneficial transactions through markets.
So, Bill, you want to take the podium for your 5 minutes of summation. Thank you.
Let's talk about some good news. In the last 25 years, the global poverty rate has fallen from 70% of the world's population living in poverty to now 30% of the world's population living in poverty, and it's still going down. And Joe said correctly that there will be some degree of poverty for a very long time, but the most extreme levels of poverty are actually vanishing before our eyes with the growth of the global economy. How is that happening? It's going on. We are experiencing one of the greatest booms of international trade, capital flows, and migration in world history. The freedom to transact in markets through both migrating, trading, investing worldwide, people matching freely with each other to realize positive sum gains of interaction through markets is creating remarkable opportunities. We have Egyptians exporting ceramic toilets to Italy. That's one of my favorite examples of specializations. Who is the development expert who had said, the answer is more toilets for Italy? I have not found one that said that. Filipinos sending electronic integrated circuits to the United States. Nigerians exporting floating docks to Norway. Entrepreneurs from Lesotho export cotton trousers to American men, while Fijians send cotton suits to American women. This remarkable specialization in the world economy of international trade has created opportunities worldwide for poor people to get out of poverty. And it's the greatest success story one of the greatest success stories of our era. And that's, I want to just revisit again the idea that the one reason markets work so well is because of these three channels that they get right. That they get right the incentive of both consumers to find the best bargain and find things that work for them, that they get to say what solves their problems by operating in a market. The gentleman just now mentioned correctly that the consumers at the bottom may not have enough money to meet all of their needs. The answer to that is not dismantle markets and have government take over. The answer to that is some simple solutions that have already been verified in some development work and evidence that cash transfers to the poor will alleviate some of those problems to enable poor people to meet some of their basic needs. Again, this answer is simple. Give them cash and let them then choose them for themselves in markets what works for them. So markets get those incentives right. Markets get the knowledge right that the people at the bottom, both entrepreneurs and consumers, know best what solves their own problems. And lastly, this point that's very important to me, we've talked a little bit today about rights. I just want to stress again that markets in our own day have shown themselves to be historically the most unprecedented system that has ever been known in our world today, for allowing peoples that are otherwise, states that are otherwise seemingly at each other's throats in terms of state rivalry, the peoples like Iran and Russia and the U.S. and all of these and Middle Eastern nations. But in the meantime, the peoples of these nations are engaged in peaceful, mutually beneficial transactions through migration and trade and investment. And it's right, it's not perfect, it's not flawless, it's not utopia, but it's the best we've ever seen in world economic history that has led indeed to that great decrease in poverty that I mentioned. And that's something we should really celebrate that markets have achieved. Thank you very much.